I probably broke the world record for the most hated neighbor in suburban history when I cut off water to 342 homes in the middle of a Texas summer heat wave. But hey, they dug a pipeline through my land without permission. Now I'm sitting here watching the HOA president, Cynthia, with her $300 highlights standing at my front door, her face turning tomato red, begging me to turn the water back on. I just smile and take a sip of my iced tea. Before I tell you how Cynthia nearly had a stroke, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and trust me, you'll want to stick around for the whole story because it gets way crazier than you can imagine. I never planned to be a rancher. My life was firmly planted in Silicon Valley, where I'd spent the last decade building software that helped companies track their shipping logistics. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and kept my mind occupied. That all changed when I got the call about Dad. Heart attack, they said. Sudden. By the time I made it back to Texas, he was gone. The funeral was a blur of faces I barely recognized and stories about a man I realized I hadn't spent nearly enough time with in his final years. As the only son, I inherited the Morgan family ranch, 15 acres of Texas countryside that had been in our family for 3 generations. It wasn't much by Texas standards, but it was ours. Dad had worked that land until his final day, and the calluses on his hands told the story of a man who believed honest work was its own reward. My mother, Peggy, insisted she could manage the ranch herself, but at 68, even her formidable spirit couldn't keep up with the physical demands. "Eli," she said to me one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, "your father always said this land would be waiting for you when you were ready to come home." I looked around at the rolling hills, the old oak trees, and the small creek that cut through the property. Something inside me shifted. Perhaps this was exactly what I needed, a change from the endless cycle of deadlines and digital interfaces. So I made the decision. I would take a sabbatical from my tech job and spend some time figuring out what to do with the ranch. Little did I know that decision would plunge me into a neighborhood war. I never asked for the trouble. Started exactly 2 weeks after I'd settled in. A pristine white envelope with an embossed logo appeared in our mailbox. An invitation to a neighborhood welcome gathering at the Clear Hollow Ridge Community Center. Clear Hollow Ridge was the upscale housing development that had sprung up adjacent to our property about 5 years ago. Dad had mentioned them in our phone calls, usually with a grunt of disapproval. Those city folks build their big houses and then complain about the smell of honest country, he'd said. I considered ignoring the invitation, but Mom thought it would be good for me to meet the neighbors. Your father was stubborn about them, she admitted. Maybe you can start fresh. With reluctance, I agreed to attend. I should have listened to my instincts. The Clear Hollow Ridge Community Center was a sleek, modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of their man-made lake, a small but elegant water feature that anchored the development. As I walked in, wearing my nicest jeans and button-down shirt, I immediately felt underdressed among the cocktail attire and polished smiles. A tall woman with immaculately styled blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes approached me. "You must be Eli Morgan," she said, extending a hand adorned with a diamond ring that caught the light. "I'm Cynthia Eldon, president of the Clear Hollow Ridge Homeowners Association. We're so pleased you could join us." Her voice had the practiced warmth of someone who had mastered the art of seeming welcoming while sizing you up. Standing slightly behind her was an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes, whom she introduced as Richard Coleman, the HOA vice president and a retired attorney. The pleasantries lasted exactly 7 minutes before Cynthia guided me to a quiet corner with a spectacular view of the grounds. "Mr. Morgan, may I call you Eli? We were so sorry to hear about your father's passing. He was quite a character." The way she said character made it clear it wasn't a compliment. "I'll get right to the point. Your family's ranch, while certainly quaint, has become something of a concern for our residents. She gestured vaguely toward the large homes visible beyond the trees that mark the boundary between our properties. Property values, you understand. We've had several complaints about the rustic appearance. Richard nodded gravely beside her. We'd like to make you an offer to purchase the land. Clear Hollow is looking to expand our recreational facilities, and your property would be perfect. She named a figure that was about 40% below market value, then smiled as if she'd just done me an enormous favor. I blinked slowly, taking a sip of my sparkling water to buy time. Miss Labaton, Cynthia, please, Cynthia. I appreciate your interest, but I'm not looking to sell. The ranch has been in my family for generations, and I intend to keep it that way. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I understand sentimentality, Eli. Truly, I do. But be practical. You're a tech person, not a rancher. What are you going to do with all that land? The offer is quite generous considering the state of the property. I felt a flash of anger but kept my voice calm. Again, I appreciate your interest, but my answer is no. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should be getting home. My mother is expecting me. As I turned to leave, Cynthia placed a manicured hand on my arm. Think about it, Eli. Being neighbors can be easy or difficult. I'd hate for us to get off on the wrong foot. The threat was thinly veiled, but unmistakable. As I drove home, I replayed the conversation in my head. What had Dad been dealing with all these years? When I told Mom about the encounter, she sighed heavily. They've been after your father to sell for years. Started friendly, got less so last summer. They sent him 15 separate violation notices for code infractions, even though we're not part of their jurisdiction. Your father kept everyone, said he might need them someday. She disappeared into his office and returned with a folder stuffed with official-looking letters, each detailing supposed violations from excessive foliage to unsightly equipment storage. I flipped through them, my jaw tightening. This is harassment, I muttered. Mom nodded. Your father wouldn't be pushed around. I guess now they think they'll have better luck with you. She looked at me with a mixture of worry and pride. What are you going to do? I closed the folder, my mind already turning over possibilities. First, I think I need to call an old friend. Sarah Martinez had been my classmate at UT Austin, and now she was one of the most respected real estate attorneys in the county. She reviewed the violation notices over coffee at a local diner. This is textbook intimidation, she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. They have absolutely zero authority over your property. You're not within their HOA boundaries, not subject to their covenants. These notices are meaningless, legally speaking. She tapped the stack of papers. But then, don't underestimate HOAs. They can make life extremely unpleasant when they want to. She paused. What exactly do you want to do with the ranch, Eli? I took a moment before answering honestly. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure yet, but I know I'm not selling to them at a lowball price just so they can build another golf course. Dad loved that land. It deserves better. Sarah nodded. Then, let's make sure you're protected. Document everything, every interaction, every letter, and let's have your property surveyed again to establish clear boundaries. As we parted ways, Sarah squeezed my arm and, Eli, check your fences regularly. It's amazing how often property lines get misunderstood in these situations. I would soon learn just how prescient that advice was. The next few weeks passed relatively quietly. I fell into a rhythm of ranch work, fixing fences, clearing brush, learning the daily tasks that had occupied my father's life. It was physical, exhausting, and oddly satisfying. Then, one Tuesday morning, while checking the southern fence line that bordered Clear Hollow, I noticed something that made me stop cold. A section of our property had been disturbed. Fresh dirt, recently moved. Following the trail, I discovered a new pipeline cutting across our land, buried just below the surface but visible where the dirt hadn't fully settled. It ran from the creek on our property straight toward Clear Hollow. I immediately called Sarah, who arrived within an hour along with a county surveyor. "This is blatantly illegal," she said, photographing the pipeline from multiple angles. "They've trespassed on your property and installed infrastructure without permission or permits." The surveyor confirmed the pipeline was well within our boundaries. "What's it for?" I asked, kneeling to examine where it crossed under our fence. "My guess? Water," Sarah replied. "That creek on your property, it feeds into the aquifer that supplies this whole area. Clear Hollow probably tapped into it for their fancy lake and irrigation systems." Texas water rights are complex, but one thing's crystal clear. They can't just run a pipeline through your land without easements, permissions, and proper compensation. That afternoon, I drove to the Clear Hollow Community Center and requested an immediate meeting with Cynthia. After being kept waiting in the lobby, I was finally escorted to her office. "Eli, have you reconsidered our offer?" she asked. I placed the photos of the pipeline on her desk without a word. Her posture stiffened slightly. "What's this supposed to be?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "It's a pipeline your HOA installed across my property without permission," I replied evenly. "I want it removed immediately, or I'll file trespassing charges." Cynthia's smile turned cold. "That's a serious accusation. We have all proper easements for our water infrastructure. If there's some misunderstanding about property lines, I'm sure we can clear it up." "There's no misunderstanding," I countered, sliding across the survey report. "The pipeline is 27 feet inside my property line." Cynthia glanced at the report. "These matters are complicated, Mr. Morgan. Our development has certain water access rights that predate your ownership. If you pursue this aggressively, you'll find yourself in protracted legal battles that could take years." It was a second threat she'd made, this one more explicit. I stood up. "You have 48 hours to provide proof of any easement or agreement, or I expect to see workers removing that pipeline." As I turned to leave, Cynthia called after me. "You're making a mistake, Eli. Your father understood the way things work around here. Eventually, so will you." On my way out, a man caught up to me in the parking lot. "Mr. Morgan, I'm Mike Hansen. I live in Clear Hollow." He glanced around nervously. "I can't be seen talking to you, but you should know they've been charging us extra HOA fees for a water system upgrade for the past year, $300 per quarter per household. They said it was for ensuring water independence for our community." He handed me a Clear Hollow newsletter detailing the special assessment. "Many of us have been asking questions about where all that money is going. No one's getting straight answers." Before I could respond, he was walking away. "I was never here. Okay?" Sarah's investigation revealed there was no record of any easement, agreement, or permit for the pipeline. Clear Hollow had simply taken what they wanted, counting on either my father's lack of awareness or inability to fight back. And now, they were collecting significant fees from residents under potentially false pretenses. "This isn't just about trespassing anymore," Sarah explained. "If they're misrepresenting what those fees are for, that could be fraud." I leaned back, processing the information. "So, what's our next move?" Sarah's expression was determined. "Document everything. Set up cameras along your property line, and let's figure out exactly what they're taking from you, specifically how much water and what it's worth." Water rights in Texas are a big deal, Eli. If they're tapping your creek for their entire development, that could be extremely valuable. That night, as I explained what we had discovered to Mom, she shook her head sadly. "Your father suspected something like this last summer, during the drought. He noticed the creek level was lower than it should have been. He was planning to look into it before he—" Her voice trailed off. I took her hand. "Don't worry, Mom. We're going to handle this." What I didn't say was how I was beginning to formulate a plan that would teach Clear Hollow Ridge, and especially Cynthia Elton, a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The cameras were installed the next day. High-quality security cameras disguised as birdhouses along our property line. 3 days later, they captured footage of a team led by Brad Thompson, Clear Hollow's facilities manager, crossing onto our property at 2 in the morning. They expanded the connection point at the creek, installing what appeared to be a larger pumping mechanism. The most damning moment came when Brad pulled out his phone and said, "Yes, Miss Linton, we're upgrading it now. Should increase capacity by 30%. Direct evidence of Cynthia's involvement. I showed the footage to Sarah, who filed for an injunction. This is exactly what we needed," she said. Clear evidence of continued trespassing after explicit notification. But legal wheels turned slowly, and Cynthia had clearly moved to Plan B. While we waited, rumors began spreading through the community. Neighbors who had known my family for years asked strange questions. "Is it true you're planning to start a Bitcoin mining operation?" asked Mrs. Finley at the grocery store. The local barber mentioned, "Word is, you're selling to a commercial developer planning to build a waste processing plant." The source of these rumors wasn't hard to trace. Then came official harassment. A county inspector named Thomas Green showed up unannounced, citing anonymous complaints about unauthorized construction. He found nothing, of course, but the message was clear. Cynthia had connections beyond Clear Hollow. I received a certified letter inviting me to address the Clear Hollow HOA board regarding environmental impacts from the Morgan property. It was a trap designed to put me on the defensive in hostile territory, but I decided to attend anyway, with Sarah by my side and a recording device in my pocket. The meeting was exactly the ambush we anticipated. Cynthia had packed the room with agitated homeowners and presented a slideshow of carefully selected photos of our ranch that made it look unkempt. "As you can see," she declared, "the current condition presents potential fire hazards, breeding grounds for pests, and a general depreciation of our community aesthetic." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Then she turned to me with artificial concern. "Mr. Morgan, perhaps you could explain your plans to address these issues." Her emphasis on plans made it clear she was fishing for information about my intentions for the property. I stood, feeling dozens of suspicious stares. "Thank you for your concern," I began evenly. "I'd be happy to discuss legitimate community issues. However, I'm more interested in addressing the illegal pipeline your HOA has installed on my property, the water you're taking without permission, and the $300 per quarter you're charging residents for what you're actually stealing." The room went deadly silent. Cynthia's smile turned cold. "That's a serious accusation. We have all proper easements for our water infrastructure. If there's some misunderstanding about property lines, I'm sure we can clear it up." "There's no misunderstanding," I countered, sliding across the survey report. "The pipeline is 27 feet inside my property line." Cynthia glanced at the report. "These matters are complicated, Mr. Morgan. Our development has certain water access rights that predate your ownership. If you pursue this aggressively, you'll find yourself in protracted legal battles that could take years." It was a second threat she'd made, this one more explicit. I stood up. "You have 48 hours to provide proof of any easement or agreement, or I expect to see workers removing that pipeline." As I turned to leave, Cynthia called after me. "You're making a mistake, Eli. Your father understood the way things work around here. Eventually, so will you." On my way out, a man caught up to me in the parking lot. "Mr. Morgan, I'm Mike Hansen. I live in Clear Hollow." He glanced around nervously. "I can't be seen talking to you, but you should know they've been charging us extra HOA fees for a water system upgrade for the past year, $300 per quarter per household. They said it was for ensuring water independence for our community." He handed me a Clear Hollow newsletter detailing the special assessment. "Many of us have been asking questions about where all that money is going. No one's getting straight answers." Before I could respond, he was walking away. "I was never here, okay?" Sarah's investigation revealed there was no record of any easement, agreement, or permit for the pipeline. Clear Hollow had simply taken what they wanted, counting on either my father's lack of awareness or inability to fight back. And now they were collecting significant fees from residents under potentially false pretenses. This isn't just about trespassing anymore, Sarah explained. If they're misrepresenting what those fees are for, that could be fraud. I leaned back, processing the information. So, what's our next move? Sarah's expression was determined. Document everything. Set up cameras along your property line, and let's figure out exactly what they're taking from you, specifically how much water and what it's worth. Water rights in Texas are a big deal, Eli. If they're tapping your creek for their entire development, that could be extremely valuable. That night, as I explained what we had discovered to Mom, she shook her head sadly. Your father suspected something like this last summer, during the drought. He noticed the creek level was lower than it should have been. He was planning to look into it. Before Her voice trailed off. I took her hand. Don't worry, Mom. We're going to handle this. What I didn't say was how I was beginning to formulate a plan that would teach Clear Hollow Ridge, and especially Cynthia Elton, a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The cameras were installed the next day. High-quality security cameras disguised as birdhouses along our property line. 3 days later, they captured footage of a team led by Brad Thompson.
Water access issues in both cases, adjacent properties had mysteriously ended up selling below market value after experiencing vandalism and code enforcement problems. The smoking gun came when Jennifer discovered a supposed agreement between Clear Hollow Ridge and Morgan Ranch for water access rights dated 2 years earlier and bearing what appeared to be my father's signature. This is forged, I said immediately. Dad would never have agreed to this. Sarah confirmed the document was highly suspicious. The signature didn't quite match Dad's on other legal papers. They must have created this as a backup when they realized you were fighting back, Jennifer theorized. We now had evidence not just of trespassing and water theft, but potentially forgery and fraud. Our investigation took an unexpected turn when Jennifer found an announcement in the County Water Management Bulletin. The headwaters of our creek, the source spring that fed the water onto our property, was being prepared for sale. The Water District was planning to auction the rights in 30 days. Whoever owns the source controls the flow, Sarah explained. If Clear Hollow buys those rights, they could legitimately cut off your access entirely or force you to pay them for water access. Jennifer leaned forward, eyes gleaming. So let's buy it first. I looked at Mom, who nodded firmly. Do it, she said. Your father would say the same. The trap was set. If Cynthia wanted to play dirty, I was about to show her what muddy water really looked like. Buying the water rights required careful maneuvering. If Cynthia got wind of our plan, she would undoubtedly try to outbid us. Sarah introduced me to Dave Wilson, chairman of the local water management board, who had butted heads with Cynthia numerous times. That woman, he said with a grimace, has been trying to monopolize water access for that development since they broke ground. Keeps trying to wine and dine the board members as if we can't see through it. Dave couldn't officially help us, but he explained how the bidding process worked, information that proved invaluable. We created an LLC registered to Sarah's office address to mask my involvement and submitted our bid for the headwaters. The asking price wasn't insignificant, $45,000 for a small parcel of land most people wouldn't look twice at. But considering it controlled water access to a luxury development with hundreds of million-dollar homes, it was a bargain. Sarah also introduced me to Olivia Parker, an environmental attorney specializing in water rights. Texas water law is based on the doctrine of prior appropriation, she explained. Essentially, first in time, first in right. By securing the headwaters, you'll have priority rights to that water. They can't just take it anymore. They'll have to negotiate with you. The transaction went through without a hitch. We were the only bidders, suggesting Cynthia hadn't realized the significance of the sale notice. I was now the proud owner of a rocky hillside spring that most would consider worthless, but which represented a critical chess move in our battle.
We kept the purchase quiet, with ownership recorded under the LLC name. According to Dave, news of the sale had reached Clear Hollow, causing quite a stir. When they realized someone had acquired the headwaters, though they didn't yet know who, Cynthia stormed into my office demanding to know who bought it, he told me with amusement, said it was rightfully part of their water management plan. I told her public records would be updated in due course. Cynthia's reaction to losing the headwaters was swift and vicious. Mom was confronted at the grocery store by Clear Hollow residents who had been fed misinformation. They called me a greedy old woman for not selling to improve the community, she reported, her hands shaking slightly. Then Brad Thompson and workers were caught on our security cameras attempting to extend the pipeline further onto our property in broad daylight. When I confronted them, Sheriff Miller was already there, apparently called by Cynthia, but he stood by passively, claiming it was a civil dispute he couldn't intervene in. I watched in fury as Brad smirked at me over the sheriff's shoulder. "This is private property," I said, my voice tight. "You're trespassing and destroying my fence. That's a crime, Sheriff." Miller shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Eli, there seems to be some paperwork confusion here. Clear Hollow has documentation showing they have access rights until a judge sorts it out." "Forged documentation," I interrupted. "And you know it." The sheriff wouldn't meet my eyes as they continued working. I returned to the house, a cold determination settling over me. If the system wouldn't protect us, we would have to take matters into our own hands. It was time to use our nuclear option. "We own the headwaters now," I reminded Sarah and Jennifer during our emergency strategy session. "What exactly can we legally do with that?" Olivia laid out our options. "As the owner of the source, you have priority water rights. You can regulate the flow as needed for reasonable management and conservation. You can't vindictively cut off water, but you absolutely can install monitoring equipment, flow regulators, and conduct system maintenance that might temporarily restrict flow, particularly if you're concerned about unauthorized usage downstream causing environmental harm." I looked at Mom, who had been listening quietly. "What do you think?" She straightened her shoulders. "I think your father would say it's time to show them what happens when you push a Morgan too far." The plan was set. They wanted water? Fine. Let's see who gets thirsty first. The installation of the control valve at the headwaters took 2 days of careful work. I hired a legitimate water systems engineer who installed a remotely controllable valve that could regulate or completely shut off the flow from the spring into the creek bed. Everything was done legally. Permits filed for water flow management infrastructure, proper environmental precautions taken, and official notice provided to the County Water Authority about essential maintenance and monitoring of private water resources. It cost me $26,000, but I considered it an investment in justice. Olivia advised me to document the existing unauthorized pipeline thoroughly before making any adjustments to the water flow. "Create a paper trail showing you attempted to resolve this amicably," she emphasized. Following her guidance, I sent a formal letter to the Clear Hollow HOA board detailing the illegal pipeline, the documentation of water theft, and our ownership of the headwaters. The letter requested immediate removal of all unauthorized infrastructure and proposed a meeting to discuss a potential legitimate water access agreement at market rates. I gave them 72 hours to respond before we would pursue all available remedies. Cynthia's response came in the form of a cease and desist letter from Gregory Hoffman, Clear Hollow's attorney, claiming we were interfering with established community water access and threatening countersuits. The letter referenced the forged agreement and included veiled threats about significant legal consequences. Sarah and Olivia confirmed what I suspected. It was all bluster with little legal foundation. The 72-hour deadline passed without any substantive response. It was time. On a blistering Tuesday morning in mid-July, when temperatures were forecast to hit 103 degrees, I pressed the button on the remote control that activated the valve. The effect wasn't immediately clear. Clear Hollow had some reserves, but by mid-afternoon the impact was becoming evident. The decorative fountains in the community entrance shut down first. By evening, sprinkler systems stopped functioning, leaving meticulously manicured lawns vulnerable to the scorching heat. And by the following morning, water pressure in homes had dropped dramatically, with some houses losing water entirely. The community was in chaos. Local news vans began appearing outside Clear Hollow's gates by noon on the second day. Cynthia gave a passionate interview, betraying their community as victims of water terrorism by a vindictive neighbor refusing to accept progress. She carefully avoided mentioning the illegal pipeline or the fact that they'd been stealing water for years. Families are suffering, she declared dramatically. Children can't bathe. Elderly residents are at risk in this heat, all because one man wants to strong-arm our community. Her performance was compelling, and the initial coverage was largely sympathetic to Clear Hollow. Jennifer's counteroffensive launched that same evening. She released her meticulously prepared video documentation to selected media outlets, complete with time-stamped footage of the illegal pipeline installation, expert testimonials about water rights, and copies of the forged documents. This isn't about one man controlling water, she told reporters. This is about a corrupt HOA stealing resources, defrauding homeowners, and destroying private property, then playing victim when caught. The narrative began to shift as more balanced coverage emerged, raising questions about Clear Hollow's water infrastructure and the suspicious special assessments. Day 3 brought matters to a head when an angry crowd of Clear Hollow residents appeared at our front gate, led by Cynthia herself. "Turn on our water, Morgan," she shouted through a bullhorn. "You can't hold an entire community hostage." Behind her, the crowd was divided. Some angry, others uncomfortable, clearly having seen the emerging news coverage questioning their HOA's actions. Sheriff Miller arrived, this time concerned about maintaining order. I met them at the gate, Jennifer recording everything from our porch. "This is private property," I stated calmly. "You're trespassing, and this constitutes harassment." Cynthia stepped forward, her face flush. "You're destroying our community. People will remember who took their water during a heat wave." I maintained my composure, aware of the cameras. "I'm simply managing water resources on land I legally own, Miss Elton. The same water your HOA has been stealing through an illegal pipeline you installed without permission. Have you told your neighbors they've been paying special assessments for stolen water? Or about the forged document with my dead father's signature you created?" A murmur ran through the crowd as neighbors exchanged glances. Mike Hansen stepped forward. "Is that true, Cynthia? Have we been paying for stolen water?" Others joined in with questions about the special assessments. The confrontation had backfired spectacularly. Instead of uniting the community against me, it had turned attention to Cynthia's actions. Sheriff Miller, reading the shifting mood, finally stepped up. "All right, folks, this is a civil matter that needs to be addressed properly through legal channels. Everyone disperse before this becomes a public disturbance." As the crowd broke up, Miller approached me privately. "The mayor's office called. They want to meet with both parties tomorrow to resolve this situation. 9 a.m. at City Hall." That evening, Richard Coleman called me unexpectedly. "Morgan, this has gone far enough. You've made your point." His voice lacked its usual confidence. "Turn the water back on as a show of good faith and we can negotiate a reasonable settlement." I wasn't buying it. The time for reasonable negotiations was before you installed an illegal pipeline, forged documents, and vandalized my property. "I'll see you at City Hall tomorrow." After hanging up, I consulted with Sarah and Olivia about our negotiating position. As a gesture of minimal goodwill, I remotely opened the valve to allow 6 hours of water flow overnight, enough for residents to fill bathtubs and containers. It wasn't generosity, it was strategy. I wanted to demonstrate clearly that I controlled the situation completely. The next morning, Jennifer showed me the online reaction to her videos. They had gone viral overnight, with thousands sharing the footage of the illegal pipeline and Cynthia's confrontation at our gate. Public opinion had shifted dramatically in our favor. Armed with public support, legal standing, and the literal power to turn the tap on or off, we headed to City Hall for what promised to be the most important negotiation of my unexpected new career as a rancher and water rights defender. City Hall was an impressive limestone building in the center of town. Mayor Robert Hayes, a silver-haired political veteran, had arranged for us to meet in the council chambers, a formal setting that underscored the seriousness of the situation. His assistant, Andrea Wells, escorted us to our seats on one side of a large oak table. Moments later, Cynthia arrived with Richard Coleman and Gregory Hoffman, Clear Hollow's attorney. Mayor Hayes took his position at the head of the table, flanked by 2 city attorneys and Dave Wilson from the Water Management Board. "Let's get straight to the point," Mayor Hayes began, his deep voice filling the chamber. "We have a community of over 300 homes without reliable water during a heat wave, allegations of property encroachment and unauthorized water usage, and enough bad press to damage our city's reputation for months to come." He turned to me first. "Mr. Morgan, as I understand it, you currently control the water source and have restricted flow to Clear Hollow Ridge. Is that correct?" All eyes turned to me as Sarah gave a subtle nod. "That's correct, Mayor," I replied. "After discovering Clear Hollow had installed an illegal pipeline across my property without permission, and after multiple attempts to resolve the matter were ignored or met with hostility, I purchased the headwaters that feed the creek on my property, a purchase that was completely legal. As the owner of that water source, I've temporarily restricted flow while attempting to address the unauthorized infrastructure on my land." Mayor Hayes nodded thoughtfully before turning to Cynthia. "Miss Elton, Clear Hollow claims to have proper authorization for the water access. Can you provide documentation?" Cynthia straightened, confidence radiating. "Absolutely, Mayor. Clear Hollow has maintained water access agreements with the Morgan property." She nodded to Hoffman, who produced the forged agreement. "This document, signed by Ellie's father 2 years ago, grants us an easement for water infrastructure." I stiffened, but Sarah placed a warning hand on my arm. Hoffman continued smoothly. "Additionally, the water in question serves over 300 families, making this a public utility matter. Mr. Morgan's actions constitute an improper interruption of essential services." Mayor Hayes examined the document carefully before passing it to his legal team. "What about these allegations of property damage and harassment mentioned in Mr. Morgan's documentation?" Cynthia's smile tightened. "Completely exaggerated, Mayor. We've maintained the area around our infrastructure with routine maintenance. If there was any misunderstanding about property boundaries, we're happy to address that as part of a comprehensive agreement." The bold-faced lie made my blood boil, but years of tech negotiations had taught me to keep my emotions in check. Sarah took the lead, her voice calm but authoritative. "Mayor Hayes, we have video evidence of Clear Hollow workers trespassing on the Morgan property as recently as last week, cutting fences and expanding the unauthorized pipeline. We also have documentation of systematic harassment, including property vandalism." The meeting continued in this vein for nearly an hour. Just as it seemed we were at an impasse, the chamber doors opened and Lisa Thompson entered. "I apologize for interrupting, Mayor, but as a Clear Hollow resident, I believe my neighbors and I have a right to be represented in these discussions."
Behind her stood at least a dozen other residents. We've collected signatures from 120 households demanding financial transparency from our HOA board regarding the water access fees we've been paying, and calling for an independent investigation into Miss Elton's management. The room erupted into chaos as Cynthia leapt to her feet, accusing Lisa of undermining community unity during a crisis. Richard attempted to intercede, suggesting the residents didn't understand the complex legal considerations. Mayor Hayes finally restored order by banging his gavel repeatedly. "Enough, Miss Thompson. While I appreciate citizen involvement, this meeting was arranged to negotiate an immediate resolution to the water crisis. Your concerns about HOA management represent a separate issue." Lisa stood her ground. "With respect, Mayor, they are directly connected. We've been paying hundreds of dollars in special assessments for water infrastructure that apparently involves stealing from a neighboring property. That's fraud, and it's relevant to any settlement discussion." While Hayes attempted to refocus the meeting, Sarah slipped me a note passed from Mike Hansen. It contained a bombshell. Financial records showing Cynthia had diverted over $200,000 from the HOA's Water Infrastructure Fund over 3 years, using it for personal home renovations and luxury vacations. This wasn't just mismanagement or theft of water, it was outright embezzlement. I passed the note to Sarah, who immediately requested a brief recess, which Hayes granted. During the recess, our team huddled with Mike and Lisa in a side chamber. "I work in accounting," Mike explained in a hushed voice. "After your confrontation at the HOA meeting, I started digging into our financial records. What I found is just the tip of the iceberg. She's been skimming from every special assessment for years," Lisa added, "and Brad Thompson came to me last night, terrified. He admitted Cynthia ordered him to forge Mr. Morgan's father's signature on that water agreement." Sarah's expression was one of barely contained excitement. "This changes everything. We need to get Brad's testimony on record." When the meeting reconvened, Sarah calmly presented the new evidence, requesting that the police department open an investigation into potential fraud and forgery. Cynthia's composure finally cracked completely. "This is absurd! A desperate smear campaign by a vindictive neighbor and disgruntled residents. Richard, say something." But Richard Coleman was suddenly very interested in the papers before him, avoiding her gaze entirely. Mayor Hayes instructed his staff to contact the district attorney's office immediately. "Given these serious allegations, I believe we need to adjust our approach to this negotiation." He turned to me. "Mr. Morgan, regardless of these new developments, we still have a community facing a water crisis. What terms would you accept for restoring full water access in the immediate term?" I had thought carefully about this moment. 3 conditions, Mayor. First, immediate removal of all unauthorized infrastructure from my property, supervised by county officials. Second, a proper water access agreement negotiated in good faith with fair market compensation for both past usage and future access. Third, a public apology for the harassment and vandalism my family has endured. Hayes looked to Hoffman, who had been whispering with Richard. Speaking for the HOA board, Richard finally said, distancing himself from Cynthia, "We can agree to those terms in principle, pending review of specific details." As the meeting concluded with tentative agreement, Cynthia suddenly bolted to her feet. "This isn't over, Morgan," she hissed, all pretense abandoned. "You think you've won, but I still have connections you couldn't imagine. Enjoy your victory while it lasts." She stormed out, leaving Richard to awkwardly apologize for her emotional response. Dave Wilson quietly informed me that the Water Management Board would be conducting its own investigation into possible water code violations by Clear Hollow. Between the DA looking at fraud charges and our regulatory penalties, Ms. Lawton is going to have her hands full, he noted with satisfaction. True to my word, I partially reopened the valve that evening, providing water 6 hours per day to Clear Hollow while the formal agreement was being drafted. The community quickly organized an emergency HOA meeting where Lisa presented the evidence of financial mismanagement to stunned residents. By overwhelming vote, Cynthia and Richard were removed from the board pending investigation, with Lisa installed as interim president. When I arrived home that night, Mom was waiting on the porch swing, a glass of iced tea in hand. "Your father would be proud," she said simply. The fight wasn't completely over. Cynthia's parting threat suggested she had one last card to play, but for the moment, right had prevailed over might. The fragile peace lasted exactly 9 days. Clear Hollow's new interim board, led by Lisa Thompson, was working constructively with our team to draft a proper water access agreement. The unauthorized pipeline had been dismantled, and plans were underway for a legal system. Most residents adjusted to the temporary water schedule, understanding it was a step toward a lasting fix. Even Sheriff Miller now found time to look into the vandalism on our land. As Cynthia's grip weakened, everything was moving forward, which should have warned me Cynthia wasn't done. Then a certified letter came. The State Environmental Protection Division was investigating possible contamination in the creek on my land, citing industrial chemicals. All water was ordered shut off pending review. The complaint was based on samples by Thomas Green, the same inspector who targeted us under Cynthia's orders. My phone blew up with calls from residents, media, and Mayor Hayes, all demanding answers about contaminated water. The timing was too perfect. "This is her last move," Sarah said in our emergency meeting. "She wants to make it look like you knowingly poisoned the water." Olivia noted procedural flaws. Anonymous tips don't trigger shutdowns without confirmation. Jennifer found Green had been disciplined before for falsifying reports. He's tied to Cynthia through her ex-husband's business. This reeks of her. We hired a private testing firm to collect samples, especially from the headquarters. We also asked for rapid testing from the state's main lab. Mayor Hayes sent a city engineer to observe results. Came in 48 hours. Our test showed clean water at the source and most of the property, except one section right where the creek crossed into Clear Hollow, showing traces of the chemicals. "Someone planted that," Olivia said, after consulting experts. "These are industrial solvents, not runoff. They had to be added." The evidence was strong enough for Sheriff Miller to act. With approval from the county prosecutor, he got warrants to search Green's office and Cynthia's home. What they found was shocking. Green's office had forged reports and a check from Cynthia. Her garage contained the exact chemicals used, plus receipts dated 3 days before the contamination. The charges were extensive: forgery, fraud, embezzlement, environmental crimes, conspiracy. Sheriff Miller arrested Cynthia as she tried to flee to Cancun with a bag full of cash. While the legal system moved ahead, the community began rebuilding. The new board finalized a fair water access deal, recognized our rights, and added monitoring and fair payment. Most importantly, Cynthia's culture of fear was gone. Lisa began town halls and opened the books for review. We received a significant settlement for years of unauthorized water use and damage. Instead of keeping it all, I used part of it to modernize the ranch's irrigation and create a sustainable model that helped both sides. Mom suggested we set aside part of the ranch as a nature preserve with education programs, a tribute to Dad's love for the land. He always said we were just stewards, she reminded me. This keeps his spirit alive. In the months after, a surprising partnership formed. Some residents, ashamed of past silence, stepped up. Mike Hansen led volunteer days to help fix our land. Jennifer's Records became an award-winning series on HOA abuse and water rights. And Sarah, our working relationship became something more, bound by shared values. 1 year after the valve was closed, the change was dramatic. Clear Hollow was now a model of transparency. Our ranch thrived with eco-friendly upgrades. Cynthia and Green were in prison. Richard Coleman took a plea deal. The creek flowed freely, regulated and respected, supplying water to both sides through legal means.
Even the tourism board promoted our region as an example of sustainable sharing. On a perfect fall evening, I sat by the creek with Mom, Sarah, Mike, and former enemies now turned friends. We celebrated the opening of the Morgan Water Conservation Trail, a joint project with Clear Hollow. Watching kids play near the creek that once sparked so much conflict, I raised my beer. Sometimes you have to dam the water to make people see its real value. And in the end, the true resource isn't the water, it's mutual respect. The settlement could have sent me back to my tech job in Silicon Valley, but spreadsheets didn't appeal anymore. This land with its fights and beauty was home again. Dad always said the ranch would be here when I was ready. He just didn't mention it would take a water war, a corrupt HOA, and a community uprising. As I watched the sun glint off the creek, hours now shared and protected, I knew he'd appreciate the irony. Some things matter more than we first believe, and some battles are worth fighting not because we choose them, but because they choose us. You watched it, you felt it. Now,